Okay, we're live.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this meeting, yet another meeting of the 2023-24 budget process with Mahone Bay Town Council. We will apologize to the folks at home who have been waiting patiently for us to come online as we were madly trying to all get our computers connected and almost all of us to get them muted. But we are here now, and we'll begin by acknowledging that we are gathered today in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral, present, and future territory of the Mi'kmaq people. Today, we gather with the intent followed by the living, peace, and friendship treaties, and we do so with respect, cooperation, and coexistence. We will call the meeting to order. Council, you have an agenda. Entertain a motion to approve the agenda either as presented or as you see to amend it. Council Carver moves to approve.
Accepted as it's circulated.
Thank you, and seconded by Councilor Now. On the motion, on the question, all in favor, motion's carried. Let's go to the only item on the agenda today, the draft. I think is it draft 17?
Number 17, yeah.
Number 17. Draft, we could have saved money on paper. Draft 2023-24 budget. The discussion, CAO, did you want to make some opening comments?
Well, Ashton, I just tried to, cover off where we are in this and what's left. So, I guess it's important to mention that this is the, culmination of many I If you're just tuning in now on YouTube, good news, you get to screen yourself for 12 hours of content. So, but, I think the main thing we wanted to clarify is that we've left in notation, highlighting and certain things in this version intended to be the penultimate version. And we haven't included things you'd expect to see in the final version of tidying up of the notes, press release section. After last meeting of council, budget meeting of council, we discussed adding an introduction for each of the utilities. So that those are all still intended. The final cleanup of the document, obviously. But we don't do any of that typically, making sure all the colors are correct and until we're through making changes, because it's an awful lot of work. We're changing it every 17 times.
17 minutes, we're gonna be a lot of time.
So that's just a little disclaimer, of course, like we will tidy everything up, but what we're hoping to get today is confirmation on the contents of the document, if we can get there. And then just to note that we standardly, as a council, have done a thing where, because our meetings, even though they are televised, they're not regular meetings. We usually do the formal approval of the final budget document at a regular meeting of council. So we almost treat the budget meetings as a committee, whereby when we're ready, we sort of recommend it to ourselves. Now, we don't formally do that because you are the council right now in full session, but we essentially get to the point where informally at the end of today, hopefully we're in a position to recommend to the meeting on the 13th. So that would be when the actual polished document would come forward to council. If we're not there at the end of today, obviously it's its prerogative, we can schedule another meeting, but that's the goal. And then I guess I'll also mention there have been council members who mentioned they had a hard out at 3. So we're really trying to have a focused session of no more than 2 hours, can certainly be less, that's allowed. So I think Ashley would walk you through the changes and sort of like some of the supporting documents and that. So I'll turn it over to her. I'm just going to mention at the end of the meeting, or somewhere during the meeting, if we are approving a particular request that was forwarded to us from council, so forwarded to council to the budget process from the chamber, there is a certain timeliness to that request. The draft budget that's presented does suppose that we are accepting that request. Obviously, that's council's choice to make today. But if we are going to do it, we'll also need a motion today because the application deadline they're targeting is next week, prior to the 13th. So I just wanted to mention that that's like, we've had a few meetings now where we've had a budget related motion that needed to be made in a time sensitive fashion, but I don't want to prejudge council's consideration of the request. So all that being said, Ashley, you want to take it away from here?
Yeah, so I sent out an email yesterday listing all the changes as well as highlighted them in the budget report. I did want to add one extra change to it that was just amended this morning. It's under the total revenue, And it is the dividend from area for last year's unaudited, so it won't affect our budget from this year, but, 30,000 was misplaced in another account. Misplaced is probably not the right word for it, but basically it won't affect the bottom line, but it was just allocated to an incorrect account. So once it's been reclassed over, we did receive $90,000 in dividend area money from last year as opposed to the 60 that I had previously reported. So I want to just make that clear. We budgeted 96, we received 90, so. Okay, so I don't know if you guys want me to go through what I sent yesterday, or if you guys have questions. I'm not sure if the payroll, we need to go into closed session, or everyone's just happy with it in general. So I sent out a couple things. I sent out an electric summary and a water summary, and that was just basically showing you per month for the last 2 years, exactly what we have used by area of charge. So if you have any questions on that, I can attempt to answer them. Okay. And then,
Excuse me,
Yeah.
Ashley, I'm sorry to interrupt,
okay.
but I'm unable to actually pull up the documents that Ashley sent yesterday. If somebody could just send me Ashley's email again.
I can re-forward it to you, Penny.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. No problem.
My apologies.
No, you gotta be able to see what I'm talking about.
I noticed, just your worship, if I may,
Yes,
on the summary, actually, the G&A account is yellow, which signifies something changed. But I was curious about, it's about a 48 or 49% year-over-year increase. Do we have a rationale for what constitutes that increase?
Were you looking, sorry, I was just sending kind of the emails to my,
Yeah, I'm sorry.
no, it's okay.
It's on page 3. So government services, general government services
Mhm.
is 587 versus last year's actual 403. And a 414 budget. So it's a 42% increase. And I just don't wonder what that was. Why that was.
That's a good question. I'm gonna have to take a look at that. I'm not sure offhand.
And I don't know what version 12 was. It was different, but I don't know by what.
So in the summary pages. I can take a look at that.
Yeah, okay, that's fine.
Okay. And then I also council requested just sort of a little summary of the trucks that are used and shared between RELC and us. So I put together just a quick little summary for you all. So hopefully it's a little bit more clear now.
As long as NA means not applicable and not attainable.
Yeah. And then the payroll report, I updated. I hope this is what you guys are asking for. And I know we were in closed session before, so I'm gonna just be careful with my words. But if there's any questions on that, I suppose we probably should go to closed session for anything like that. If there's anything specific on that. And then, yeah. So are there any questions?
Just on the truck arrangement.
Yeah.
Is it really biannual payments versus semi-annual payments? So it's not every 6 months we receive a payment, it's every 2 years you receive payment?
No, I think it's every.
Yeah, biannual is a difficult phrase because it does either mean every 2 years or twice a year.
Yeah, I was taking it
We
twice a
used to do
year.
that, so
Okay.
she was meant it the other
Oh,
way.
yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
I was taking it as twice a year.
Every second year.
Every second year.
Semi-annuals. I think in the American dictionary, both are, but with an E. Interesting. I don't know.
American.
So I guess the takeaway
That
is
that might be the proper British way to make a distinction. I think they just get used interchangeably.
every 6 months we receive a payment.
Yes.
That's the intent.
Yeah.
So just on your document, Ashley, is that actually occurring? Based on the receipt of the last payment?
There's
So-
one missing.
We're missing one right now, yes. So
Okay.
we,
Okay, anyway, you get the point.
yeah, they're behind on one,
okay.
but I
And-
told them. So.
And this loan goes another 2 or 3 years, I guess, based on the outstanding balance of
Yeah,
86?
I don't think it's.
2 or 3 more years,
yeah,
not forever.
not forever.
Okay. So we'll add that to our list of accounts receivable. And the only other question about that is that brought in as revenue, or does that go directly into the, equipment reserve for the electrical utility?
I would assume this is going right into revenue to offset the payments to MFC.
Uh-huh. Okay, fair enough. Okay, thanks for that, Ashley. I think that clarifies a lot of
Hopefully,
those
yes.
questions. Yeah.
Any more questions on that, by all means?
Oh. I went for a utility one. Okay, just questions that I had. The connection fees, like, there was a huge one. It was 4,000
Is this for the water utility or the electric?
gallons, yes, for water. April 22nd and 23rd. So went from like, I don't understand the big jump in from 1 month to what other months were.
I think it would just be the amount of units that are connecting.
So a lot of people like moved into town or something.
Yeah, that's what I
Oh.
would, yeah.
Okay, and what?
Which
does-
month are you thinking of?
Well, it's under April 22nd, 2023. Connection fees were,
So,
Because I think it might just be the monthly versus the annual is E18, so E10 is 1 month and then E18 is a whole year.
Yeah.
I just wasn't sure.
oh, okay.
so
Okay.
April 2022, 23 is 350, and then the 4,000 is the total. It's
Okay.
LE18.
You gotta go sideways off the page.
It was hard to read these.
I
Yeah.
know,
I couldn't get it all up on the screen together. so-
absolutely, and I tried putting out
I
the
know.
it was a disaster.
I know.
There is month to month variation, but January was 650 and that was the largest in any.
Yeah,
Yeah,
okay. And I don't know what PY and CY mean.
prior year and current year.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, accountant doc.
And I'm not, haven't been through this.
Merit.
Mayor.
Mara, I think this is for the CAO. So I think Ashley has provided the information that we've requested that talks about like the overall picture of the reserves as it relates to our FIR and the province's perception of reserves. So like, as I understand it, based on Ashley's commentary, this was embedded in the email. Was that green is good, yellow is kind of on the verge of good, and then red, of course, is self-explanatory. So now that the province, I know you've talked about this a little bit, just to make sure we're all on the same page. The province is really less interested in the subdivisions between the various categories of reserve, and really more interested in the overall financial strength of the reserves. Would you be of the opinion that our reporting to the province will show up as green, or will we still see yellow, red and green and green?
So I was remembering all the discourse between the municipalities and the province about changing this one. But actually what happened in the 2021-22, which is the most recent that's been released, is that they put both.
They put
So these two indicators are both there. So we would have previously one that was yellow and one that was green. And if we went
And
with
that
this,
would
we'd
be
have one that was red and one that was green.
so
with no, and if we wanted to say, oh, well, we want to stay in the yellow on the operating reserve, like it's clear that we'd need $200,000 more.
right,
It's a simple thing, reduce capital to revenue, take that 200,000 from
Yeah.
capital,
yeah,
but that's really council's level of comfort. Our total reserves do demonstrate that we're way above the minimum levels there. Their recommendation is 30%. And we would have been in 2023 at over 100. And in 2023-24, according to this projection, at 61.4, which is double the where they say you don't want to get down to 30.
And is
But how
that,
much comfort does council have, because our hands are tied with respect to the use of the capital reserves, so.
is that and what is the metric for green for operating? 30% of operating budget?
No, it's 10%.
10% of operating budget.
Yeah.
So it's hard to know, right? I mean, so right now we would be budgeting a red.
Like we'll get a better indicator score if we move money into the operating reserve,
Yeah.
but at the same time, we usually do better in a year than we expect to. And our operating reserve is the beneficiary of that. So it's really more about council's comfort, like, we have enough money in the bank according to the province, but we'd be wiser to have our hands tied less with respect to that money in the event of an operating shortfall. So that, I guess that's all it comes down to. And
Yeah,
I shouldn't say it's just capital reserve, because we could also, of course, use some of that new reserve, the strategic priorities reserve. That would also be a way to, if council wanted to put more money in operating reserve, we just simply need to decide where that money would be coming from.
Mhm.
It's not a reserve to reserve transfer, don't get me wrong. We're not talking about taking money out of one reserve, putting it out. We're just talking about spending money out of a reserve that would allow money to then be left over to be transferred into operating,
Mhm.
but.
Okay, just a quick question, it might be just a typo. In the actual, on the revenue, you've got 21, 22, but down in the expenses, the 20, 21. So are those figures accurate for the 21, 22, or are they actually 20, 20?
Where are you looking, Richard?
In the operating expenses, so the page 3, I guess it is. Where we were looking. And up in the heading, it just says actual 21, 2021. And on the revenue, it says 21, 22, so. I just want to make sure those.
Yeah,
figures-
you're right, that should say,
Those are the. actual
It's a little typo. It should say 21, 22.
right, too,
But
yeah.
those are the actual.
Took me a minute to spot it. We've looked at
Yeah.
this 17 times.
Yeah.
That's the first time it's been spotted.
Yes,
Yeah, I just want to make sure those are the right.
yes,
figures.
thank you for noticing that.
So that's the sort of tidy up we always like to get in that final version.
But any of those, please let me know, because sometimes if you look at it long enough, it just kind of,
That's blends in.
yeah, thank you. Okay, so I can go over a little bit on my email, basically what we did. So we pushed promotions council, St. James parking lot paving to 24, 25. So you'll see that amended in the 10-year capital schedule. We removed Edgewater main intersection from the capital and shifted it to the special operating initiatives at 18,000. So it is now I was gonna say in the tab, but if I'm thinking Excel, it is now in the sheet before the capital project.
And that's just what happens, obviously, when you don't proceed with an actual capital project, then it's not a capitalizable expense.
Exactly.
The 44,000 got moved back to expense.
It's not gonna be 44 though. It's
18.
gonna be 2950, because the additional was to choose a design to proceed with. So we saved that, because that was an optional.
Okay, I didn't know that.
And then we moved multiple capital projects from capital reserve to capital to revenue. And I think that was discussed in last council meeting.
Well, it was basically
2 weeks
just,
ago,
I think we
so
were gonna be
we were
left with
trying
an
to figure out
amount of
the
money,
general-
so we moved some
Yeah.
capital revenue, and the rest we'd look at line items. in there.
Exactly. And then a couple just clean up with some little formula that need to be fixed, as that's usually happens. And then we added in the following expenditures. So we wanted to zero balance the budget. So we had a little bit of a surplus. So we went back and reassessed exactly where we had already cut from, and were able to kind of add some things. So you see we add some to the bylaw enforcement line. So 10,000.
Not enough for a full-on employee, the
Not-
thought here is just overtime.
Yeah,
And a decimal meter.
exactly. And then you can look at the list, but 10,000 for special projects, 3,000 for addition to the sports field insurance. 4,000 for asset management initiatives, 15,000 for tree removal, and 3,000 for climate and environment initiatives. So those should be all highlighted in the budget. But you'll,
What are the asset management initiatives again?
So asset management initiatives usually is for paying for the external services of the consultants who manage our GIS system.
Oh, okay.
And in this case, basically what I'm hoping to put in, what I had cut out, what I told Chart, like, well, council's really lean on the budget, so we may not be able to do. is basically a cleanup of the data in the existing system from 2017 that the province picked up for us. And we've been using it ever since, but it's messy. So the $3,000 there will not be that noticeable to anyone, but it's basically making it more reliable information when staff are using it in the field, which they're now using for the first time this year. So that's what it's for. It's just, that's the line item we use for asset management initiatives, but I was going to have to be extra careful with it if we couldn't afford to do that work, but it's work that is beneficial as soon as we can do it. It just, I didn't want to okay it if council was worried about getting a leaner budget. And yes, so we noticed the tree removal double counting thing when we added the 15 to trees and the budget ended up in a $15,000 deficit.
Yeah.
And it was really bedeviling to figure out what had happened for a minute until finding that there was a formula error there that was double counting it.
When we talk about, sorry, Francis, go to it.
Yeah, no, I just want, based on just the conversation we finished, I just want to declare my conflict of interest. Budget conversation.
Fair enough.
So I don't know if I just step up.
On the entire budget conversation, there's not gonna be anyone left in the room if you guys do that.
No, fair enough.
I don't know.
If there's a grant request or something, but I mean, like, everybody's got something in the budget. I don't know what to say.
Is that $3,000 for the insurance for the sports field already reflected in the budget numbers?
It's reflected in this graph, so that we're highlighting these things because these represent changes from last time.
Increments, yeah.
So it was 18 and in the current version, I'm recommending 21. And I can speak to that. It's because our insurer had a lot of concerns, which are certainly going to reflect on the party that we're entering an agreement with. In order to meet our concerns, they're going to have to pay more. Which, when we talked about this whole thing, we said, this is the money necessary to make this deal work. So my recommendation would be that we not let it fall out over that. If it's a $3,000 cost, that would be incurred by the organizations that we're looking to work with. Yeah, so that's why it's a recommendation in there.
Is that fairly typical when we incur incremental insurance costs for activities that the town's general policy doesn't cover? That the town pays the incremental cost?
It would only be in respect of organizations like the pool, like where we're in it a little bit more intimately in it. So if the pool had a big increase in insurance costs, that would be one of the things they would raise to us when we determine what their annual subsidy amount is. And the model for this sports management agreement is the agreements that MODL has with a number of organizations, and that has been their approach as well. So like insurance costs are starting to be a really difficult thing for small organizations, and if you don't support them on that, well, then they'll pull out of the agreement. So it's kind of a choice of, in MODL's case, these organizations have had agreements for years, but if one of them comes along and says that, look, we will have to pull out of this because we're getting a $3,000 cost of increase to our insurance, well, MODL has two choices, right? They either don't do it and risk the whole agreement, or they pony it up. The only one I think for us that we really do that is the pool. We don't, I mean, the marina doesn't receive an operating subsidy.
Is that handled then at the staff level, or is that a discussion that comes to council, or is there a need for a policy?
So we have a representative from council on the pool committee. So if there's an interest, Joe can participate in those conversations, but the pool has a thing every year where they get ready for their budget as the new year approaches, and they look at it and they sit down with Jonathan and I, and it's worked out the last couple of years that the 15,000, we increased it to 15 during COVID. At that time, it had to do with pool startup costs, but over the last 2 years, it has somewhat flipped to other additional costs that they're experiencing. And we've just said to recommend the council keep it at that level. So behind the scenes, the reasons that they're at that level have changed since COVID, but it reflects increasing chemical and insurance costs and those type of pressures that, but it's always been at the staff level. If there's a recommended increase, then we'd usually say to the council, what is the driver behind the recommended increase?
Okay.
So I think it's important to note that most of these areas were areas that I cut in order to bring the budget down. The real exception to that more than anything here is the totally new $10,000 for special projects MBTC lighting project request. So that is a totally new thing that you received at your last meeting.
That requires.
And we haven't talked about it at all. I was like, well, I'm not going to go back and do an 18th version of the budget to put that in. So let's talk about it, part and parcel to the draft.
I think you all know my feeling on the expenditures at the sports field. So if we have an organization that requests this kind of an agreement with the town, are we going to, in the future, absorb all their costs? I mean, we already given $18,000. Now they're asking for an extra $3 because of the increased costs. Are we always gonna cover all the extra costs for these organizations?
I think that'll be up to council. I mean, I'm approaching this as a 3-year fixed amount for a pilot project, and the fact that it's not signed off on yet is the reason that this has come up for discussion. But if we had said like, okay, it's 18, we'd signed off on it in the spring, it was already signed off on, and then they were to come back and say, okay, we already agreed to it, we've taken on the responsibility, but there's a $3,000 additional cost. I think that would be a different conversation, because in this case, they haven't agreed to it. And if we come back and say, well, look, we're not giving you the money you need, I mean, what choice do they have but to pull out from the agreement? So that's where it's in council's in a negotiation, so.
Yeah, but they requested the agreement to start with, so.
In the hierarchy of needs, we need to ensure that the appropriate level of insurance is in place to protect the town. And protect the group too.
Certainly in our interest, so we're willing to import the activity to have it properly insured.
So
The alternative is no activity, no insurance.
if, like, in a future year, if you came and said, our funding included the insurance premiums, whatever they may be, this year it's 3,000, next year it could be 4,000. Could be 5,000 in 2 years. Heaven forbid what the premium would be if there was ever an injury, it'd be dramatically higher than this. So, like, I think this is fine for the 3-year period, for the 3-year pilot. If we're getting into a situation where this is going to evolve into a longer term arrangement beyond the 3 years, like, I think that would be a natural cost that would be wise for the town, wouldn't it, to pick that piece up, to ensure that we're protected. Like, we want to make sure that we don't have more fertilizer, less insurance in the grand scheme of life.
We
I
do the
would
same
think.
thing with the marina though, Councillor Feeney. They pay their own insurance beyond the town's general policy that enables them to be providing the service that they provide.
But they provide proof to the town that they have the insurance.
Yeah, so the
Right.
difference
But
is
they
on the
pay for
cost side.
Fair
The practice that Joe was talking about is still like, the activity that they're insured for is an activity we're not at this side of the marina, is an activity we're not insured for. So if the activity were to stop, okay, great.
It would need
But if the
insurance.
activity were to continue at our liability, we would pay more to get that coverage. And that's the same thing here. Like, we're not insured for sports programs. We don't offer any sports programs. We're insured to have a piece of property that people walk on. But as soon as you start offering sports programs, we have a gap in our liability there. And similarly, we're not insured to operate a marina, tender, any of that. Like, that's the insurance that the
So
marina has.
So basically with this agreement, we're saying that we're operating the sports program?
No, we're saying that they are.
They are, so therefore why wouldn't they cover the insurance?
Well, this is a negotiation. If council feels that they should do this for us, you just write back and say, sorry, we're not giving you as much money. And then they can decide if they're just gonna walk away or not. That's what I've said many times, is this is just a choice to either offer what the group is indicating it will require, or not do that, in which case, that probably the activity won't happen. And that's totally a council's prerogative. I just want everyone to understand that you can't just say, do all the activity, but don't cost the money like that. They have a right to say, sorry, we're not absorbing that cost. It was a nice idea. So that's council. I know different members of council have different opinions, but it's gonna have to come down to council deciding one way or the other.
Yeah.
To look
And
at,
approval of the budget just means the allocation's there, right? Like, approval of the budget means the allocation is there. Council is having a lot of different simultaneous conversations, putting this agreement in place. The budget is one of them. So it's not the only one.
I think that's helpful to my mind. If we approve the budget, it's just the allocation and we still have the negotiating.
We looked at a draft letter to send, but we have to actually put a number in it and confirm it before it's.
Okay, so that's helpful, that the allocation is there and it gives us the negotiating room or time.
So. that doesn't-
You can put it that way, but I think also the allocation is there, but what that really just means is that council has pretty clearly indicated a commitment, but I'm not going to send anyone a check until council approves the letter that would go with it.
So that's my question. So are you saying that by approving the budget, we're not approving the expenditure for this, let's pick this one in particular, the $3,000. But that until council actually makes a motion and approves the letter, which would include all of these financial decisions, until that letter goes out, regardless of what the budget says.
Yeah, I don't have any authority to cut a check to anyone right now. Like, we don't have a confirmed agreement, so that's the decision I'm trying to make. The council as a group says,
But-
we're passing a budget with an amount of money for this. There's an assumption that there's
Oh,
a
so-
ability to stand there into the agreement,
Just
but I'm not running with it. I'm not, because it's a 3-year agreement. So the budget doesn't even provide for the following 2 years. Like, that's still a decision council has to make.
So I'm just hoping we can avoid a situation where over the next 3 months, at every council meeting,
Yeah.
we are making motions to approve, sending letters to validate budget items.
Decisions on budget.
So like in my mind, when the budget is approved,
That's
I
not
don't
the
personally feel a requirement to revisit it other than with the knowledge that the mayor is gonna sign a letter that's gonna map to the $21,000. We're also gonna say, there's also gonna be a letter signed by the mayor saying we're gonna give the Mahone Bay Chamber $10,000. We're also sending a letter to, we're also funding the bylaw enforcement.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping we're not
No,
coming
I
back and
think it's a
revisiting
very
these
important
things.
point to remind everyone, Joe, is that like approval of budget is providing the authorization. It's just that in this case, I don't have any reason to spend that money unless we have an underlying 3-year
Fair,
agreement. So,
fair enough.
yeah, it's a fine distinction. I maybe overcomplicated by even making it, because I certainly don't want council to think everything in the budget is gonna come back. You're absolutely correct. We've got items in the budget that I'll run with.
Mhm.
Councillor Carver.
With apologies for my slow brain. What does this mean in terms of precedent? Again, I know we've talked about the Wooden Boat Society and the marina. Just go through that again for me, please, in terms of the precedent and what it might mean for future decisions.
So, yeah, leaving aside the budget, I mean, the whole big context here is that we've been approached about the possibility of a co-management agreement for a piece of town property. So that is one of 3 now that we would have, because we have one with the pool and we have one with the marina. In each of those cases, the agreement provides for, what is the latitude of the organization that is being delegated a responsibility by the town, so in the case of the pool, it's to operate the pool, marina is to operate a marina, the sports field would be to operate the sports field. We have in every case different things that we agree to do as a part of the agreement on our end. And the other party has things that they agree to do on their end. There's a financial element of that, whether there's an exchange of money. In the case of the marina, it's only $1. In the case of the pool, it's more. In this case, it's proposed to be more. But in the case of the marina, our financial liabilities and our expectations, things we do work on the marina that works directly to the benefit of the society that we agreed to do in the letter. We could have said, hey, you're gonna grade it, you're gonna do this, you're gonna do that. And they might have said, okay, but can you help us with the cost? And instead, we said we would do those things. So every one of these agreements speaks to a management of a town asset by a third party in the public interest. And in every case, we've laid out what they do, what we do, and if there's any exchange of resources entailed. So I don't think there's anything about it that represents a new precedent. I think when we did our strategic plan, council actually looked at those other examples and said, this has been an effective model for the town. This is probably the way we should approach recreational assets going forward as a municipality with no recreation programming capacity. So, I think it's absolutely in line with council's intentions. But, I'm sure there was a lot of debate in each of those 2 previous cases about whether that was an appropriate arrangement, be the town running it themselves. And actually, we seem to have that debate about the marina currently. So I think, there's always going to be those issues. We'll probably get some complaints about the way that the Mahone Bay Center and Mahone Bay United operate the field if in fact they have an agreement with us, and we'll work that out. Like that's natural, that, but I think it is precedented. I think it is intended by the town. We just gotta make sure in every case that the public interest is served.
So bottom line, it's part of our strategic plan to support recreation in the community and community initiatives for recreation in the community. Bill.
As to borrow a phrase from Councillor Feeney, I don't want to relitigate this whole thing. But in the case of the pool, in the case of the marina, the users pay a fee that contributes to offset the cost of the operation, not so the case with the soccer field.
Well, Mayor, as you know, council requested the overall budget be provided by the club, which they did provide. And based on just my memory, that even with this $21,000 contribution, the overall programming cost for the club is well over 40,000. So I take your point about, I think it's a misnomer to say that the town is funding 100% of the club. We may be funding a big piece of the cost of the maintenance of the field, but the overall programming for the club is, I believe, according to the budget that they provided us by request, is a little over 40,000.
It's also worth noting that Mahoney United's programs have no charge, but I don't think we've received any indication that they don't mean to charge for the retirees for use of the field.
No, they do
I
that.
don't know what you're talking about.
No, I just want the people watching us.
Councillor Wilson.
When we were going through this debate a couple of weeks ago, it occurred to me that a compromise situation with regard to this user fee is that a large percentage, I don't know what, but a large percentage of the kids that use that field are not from the town. And I believe the onus should be on Mahoney United to make a very strong request of MODL for a significant bump of money to reflect that. And I've mentioned that to the deputy mayor a couple of weeks or so ago. I suspect it might be in progress.
Councillor Feeney.
Overall, I think this, as I understand it, this is a balanced budget on an operating basis. We've backfilled the program with these edits that are in the email to get us to a balanced budget. But for the first time in 15 years, we're funding capital out of property tax revenue. And I believe it's $300,000, give or take, which represents about 50% of the increase revenue for the town. So you've all heard my rant many times over many years about our requirement to find revenue sources to fund capital. We've never had to avail of the use of property tax to do that, but we do now. So a lot has changed. We're no longer enjoying large dividends from area. The gas tax hasn't increased in 15 years, or 10 years, or a very long time, certainly not in 6 years. And so I think overall, although the tax base is supporting higher revenues through higher assessments, because we're leaving the rate flat, we are taking, this is a different budget. We are taking $300,000 of what would have gone to operating initiatives, and we are targeting them at capital initiatives. And I think that's an important nuance, and it's a big change for the town. But the downside of that is that we are running pretty hot on operating, and our operating reserve is lower than we would like, and certainly lower than the province would like. So I guess the takeaway, we don't need to talk about it too much at this meeting, but what if we run a positive variance on transfer tax, for example? Or what if the federal government, in the context of an election, says, I'm doubling the gas tax revenue for the year? Or what if magically area decides I'm going to cut us a check for $70,000? What would we do? I think the answer would be we would run the program, we would just not avail of the capital out of revenue so that we would run a surplus. But I think we have to, if that's the case, we need some checks and balances. There has to be an understanding between council and staff that increased revenue needs to translate into an improvement in the operating reserve, because it would sure be nice to get that green. And it sure would be nice to get that green. That would take a lot of, personally, I think that would take a lot of our stress away. And I think that would be a big accomplishment if we could get to that by the end of the term. So we have this year and next fiscal year. I don't know if we can get the operating reserve funded to the point where it's green this calendar year, but I think aspirationally, that would be, actually, Peter Dunker said, don't talk about aspirations, talk about achievable objectives. I believe it's an achievable objective to get the operating reserve green by the end of the term. And what that may mean is another $200,000 in the cash flow. So we might not get there this year, but if we could get there by the end of next year's budget, I think that would be a tremendous achievement.
I think it's a very good point about, what happens if the dedicated capital streams come in higher than expected, given that this is the first year we've had capital revenue. So normally in that scenario, that money would obviously accrue to the capital reserve. But in this case, if it reduces capital out of revenue, then, which is reasonable, then what would happen obviously is we result in a better year end. And therefore those funds end up accruing to the operating reserve. So I think it's a very reasonable approach, if others agree. The worst case scenario for the capital reserve in that situation is the projection. Like, we're only talking about not doing better than this budget projects to do. And it's just a question of which reserve gets the benefit of those dedicated streams being higher than anticipated. Wouldn't include the gas tax, because it's gotta go gas tax, but the other ones, we do usually do better on deep transfer than our projection. So what if we do? Had other people feel about it? I don't think it's not gonna change the document, but as an underlying assumption, it's good for Ashley to know if the council feels that's the way to go.
We finished.
Yeah.
How do we proceed with the $3,000 from here on in? Do we have to have a motion to keep it in there, or do we have to have a motion to
Walk slow.
Sorry, Richard.
I'm not finished on the 3,000.
Okay, so
No,
we'll come back to that, Joe.
I really support Councillor Wilson's idea about in regard to the out of town people, or at least having modal, ensuring that modal is in on this. I'm not quite sure how we make that happen, whether at minimum we ask the MBU and NBC, Mahone Bay United and Mahone Bay Center, to make that request. Have we already done that? Have we already? We've already done it. Well, given that, and given that I believe that we could do some, behind the curtains advocacy around that, I would be in support of the $3,000 insurance. Okay.
Just make a quick comment about the advocacy. I actually think that it would be much more likely that an independent group would receive MODL's support without
Us. Whatever.
Fair enough.
Whatever.
Yeah, that's a fair point.
But on the other side of the coin, if they can get some success out of MODL, then there wouldn't be any need for us to support the 3,000. Hopefully they will get that much out of MODL to cover the shortfall there.
And I mean, one way to look at that is, over the course of the pilot, the demonstrated success of the program and the ability to court MODL for more, maybe that, but in terms of off the top, yeah, it's almost saying we'll just approve a lesser amount, you guys figure it out. That's still council's option, right? Like, if you come back $10,000 less than the requested amount, they'll either fine 10,000 or the agreement won't move forward. So that's still council's prerogative.
Doesn't MODL contribute to the swimming pool costs?
Yes.
And they contribute to the Mahone Bay Center
They
costs,
do.
I think $12,000 for that. It would be a reasonable expectation to think that if MBU and NBC was to approach MODL, there may be some consideration.
Do we need a motion?
It's really not, I mean, it's a draft budget, so it's in the draft budget, so I guess if somebody wants to take it out, you
Oh,
need a
okay.
motion to
So
take
maybe,
it out.
okay.
And I think if you did, the motion would be to revert to 18,000, because it's a little confusing if they take out the 3,000.
So as it relates to the agreement, the overarching multi-year agreement,
The one
Let's-
to which we're gonna have a covering letter.
well, yeah, the arrangement between ourselves and the club and the NBC. The $21,000 budget for 3 years and the capital appropriation and the rezoning of the program. Like, when are we doing that? Like, are we waiting for council to approve that? Our submission, or are we still negotiating back and forth?
Yeah, so there's two things that are hung up. One is council committing to an amount of money a year for 3 years, which is kind of the conversation we're having. And then the other one is ironing out this insurance issue. So it looks like the insurance will cost more, but there is still some concern on their end right now about whether MBU can actually hold that insurance. So there's a possibility right now that we may have to adjust the agreement so that the Mahone Bay Center has the responsibility for insurance. So that's the only hang up, other than the council actually needs to obviously approve a 3-year agreement that we wouldn't,
So, sorry, Mayor, just to.
So as soon as possible, basically the
So-
answer. but-
If not today, the 13th or the 28th, so those are the two options.
Yeah,
Or,
yeah, I would say that's the latest we're looking at going.
And-
What about the rezoning piece?
Well, that's dependent on the Plan Mahone Bay process.
Well, that's,
But
yeah.
it's not part of the agreement. It's
you
just, it's
can't
just a
put-
coincident
But you
thing.
said you were gonna have it in the letter.
But Joe
well,
mentioned.
no,
that.
what I'm suggesting is that we're doing there are many prongs to this
Yeah.
strategy. Okay, so if not, so are we not able, are you recommending to not move that along today? Like we've had a counselor, he's declared a conflict, he's not at the table.
To
We have-
actually
we have
say
this-
when we.
we have
reach the
this
end of
moment now.
discussion.
We have another meeting on the 23rd. I don't believe we're gonna have a full council. I don't believe we're gonna have everyone at the council table, but on the 13th. And then we're on to the 28th, and then we're on to July. I'm just wondering, why don't we, what's stopping us from moving that forward now? And if staff's
Yeah.
recommending we
No,
delay,
I mean,
let's
if.
delay, but
If you wanted to make a motion about a 3-year commitment and a certain amount of money today, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I will still have to delay until MBC and MBU say they've resolved the insurance issue, because they're not in a position to sign the agreement as it stands until they've resolved that issue. But we wouldn't be waiting for anything on our side.
like, I was.
It's a two-way thing, right?
I was under the impression that we had already moved that item along, but if we haven't and we do.
I just need
and
the
we-
money
And
commitment.
we need to do that, then, I think now is the right time. I think we've already had the deputy mayor, step away from the table. This is a good a time as ever, so I would move that council direct staff to enter into, the 3-year arrangement with the NBC and the club, and provide funding, at $21,000 per year for the next 3 fiscal years.
Seconded. Okay. You've heard the motion. On the question. All in favor? And opposed? Motion's carried.
Who seconded it? I'm really sorry. I
Penny-
realized
Penny
related
Curtin.
I was in Kelly's role, but okay, thank you.
Okay, let's keep going.
Sorry, Mayor, there was a,
So
sorry,
now I guess
sorry,
the
actually.
debate is officially over because the motion's
Yeah.
been passed.
155, then
So, there was also, CAO, a timely requirement for decision around, the Mahone Bay Center appropriation. Not the Mahone Bay Center, the Chamber of Commerce, $10,000 lighting appropriation, because there was some other federal program that we want to avail of, so why don't we move that along now as well? If, do we think there's, I assume there's support for the request from the table?
Yes. For me.
Good. I'd like a refresher on what the request was.
So this is the light the town proposal that council received at our last regular meeting and referred here. The proposal is actually the town apply for beautification of streetscaping funding, because it can only be granted to municipalities in the amount of $25,000, for which we would commit to put up 10,000, with the chamber committing to put up the remainder. So it'd be matching 25 for a total of 50, and the goal being to get that provincial money so that the chamber could order $50,000 worth of lights and associated equipment. So we were being asked to provide 10,000, but also to apply. And we're also being asked to put up the stuff, which is an in-kind contribution that the electrical department would obviously have to do.
So $10,000, and then there's $25,000.
So $10,000 from town in order to combine with 15 from the chamber to leverage 25 out of the
And
project.
we can apply for another
Yeah.
20.
10 of 50.
But it's not us contributing 10 to, the reason it's not a grant, it's not us contributing 10 to them and them applying. It's them contributing 15 to our 10 and us applying, because this is not eligible, the chamber's not eligible for this.
And what happens if we don't get the 25 from the provincial program?
I mean, I'm only taking our 10 as contingent on the application, like that's this motion.
Successful.
So I'm assuming we're back to drawing board if this doesn't.
And where are the lights going?
All over town, with 27 locations, well, I should say on the main.
On the main street, okay.
There's 27 locations on the main street.
A question on that. The electrical work to put the plugs in on the poles, that type of thing, is not included in this extra, in this 60,000 or 50,000?
It is included.
It is included, okay.
I got Phil.
I just want to make sure, I
It's
just want to
labor.
make sure it wasn't in addition to.
No, so even the labor is theoretically included in here, although we'll see how that shakes out, but certainly the labor and equipment is included.
Okay, so it's a total cost of $50,000.
To put it up, yeah, all done.
Given the relatively low operating cost of LED lighting, who pays the electrical bill?
Well, we do.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah,
The town
they're not,
pays that.
they're not metered, it's just it's a loss, it's a system loss, we won't track it.
So 10,000 up to 20% of the project would be, so if
Yeah, I
they
mean,
come in, if they come in and say, we're gonna give you 40, then we'll.
I would say that the motion here would be that the town apply to the provincial beautification and streetscaping program for $25,000. To which the town is is committed to contributing $10,000.
So
So
moved.
it's part of the grant.
I'm gonna move that, Mayor.
Second.
Councillor now seconds. You've heard yet another motion
Mhm.
on the question. All in favor? Motion's carried.
All right, Ashley, say something while I'm writing all this stuff down.
Are there any questions on the budget?
Tree removal and planting.
Good, you guys are giving her today. Thank you.
So yeah, I mean, we don't have to have any more because that is the last outstanding item, but
This lighting, it's for merchants, I take it. That's why the chambers involved.
yeah, I mean, it's a little decorative star things that we can put up in the Christmas season.
Okay.
And it will extend, it won't be just Christmas season, I think through January. the
So we can
direct
have a more
months.
generic winter thing like
Yeah.
stars and stuff,
Yeah.
so it can be out for a couple of months, but
Yes.
yeah, it won't be around the summer.
Electric summary, the summary you gave on Excel
Yeah.
sort of shows that commercial sales, there's a highlighted section there that shows domestic sales, commercial sales, and industrial power sales.
The domestic, the commercial.
Yeah, where it's showing operating revenue, just wanted to double check, because I it was a bit of a shock to me that commercial sales are only 100,000.
Oh, yes.
Does that just?
I think it's just if you look at the actual kilowatt hours, they're fairly low, and I would assume,
So in trying to understand that number.
Yeah.
Does that mean it's from all the commercial establishments? That's the number, or is it all commercial enterprises in town?
it's based off of a certain size. Let me see if I can find that out for you. There's an actual regulation on exactly where each individual item goes within those buckets.
If somebody has a commercial entity in their house, it might not necessarily come in under commercial sales for electrical.
Unless they, yeah, if they were, maybe if they were separately metered.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And in the industrial one, while she's looking this up, does that include just RPS, or is a new nursing home included in that?
Well, I think the nursing home is currently up and using power.
Yeah. But is it commercial or is it industrial?
If you look on the, let me see, if you look on the rate sheet, I believe. Hold on.
Who decides that?
not us.
That's our council, whether it's industrial or commercial or.
I mean, I'm
Who
thinking
decides
it's
whether-
domestic because
So-
it's residential, but it's private business.
So in 2023, right now, it's split between residential and commercial. So, and I don't know why, but this is what the government tells us, when they sent out their report. But 16 million is still in residential and 368,000 is in commercial right now.
Well,
So
people
I-
live there. It's a residence, people live there. Residential.
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess I was thinking of more of a business, but that's, yeah, that's great.
They will separate administrative offices sometimes,
Mhm.
so it may just be what part of the building is being used.
You know, it is a commercial enterprise. They're making
Well,
money
it's
on it.
Yeah, it is both, and it's not impossible, like a building that is split commercial residential will be assessed with a split. It's just that it's all one operation, so they're getting into the weeds about what is what, but I would imagine it's, given the small amount that's commercial, I would imagine that's what they're doing.
Oh, sorry, Penny, do you still have a question?
No, I'm done.
Okay, so the connect load has to be below 10 kilowatts. And then once
For
you
it to be
suppress,
residential,
sorry,
it has to be below 10 kilowatts to be residential.
yeah, and then you go into, you need a demand meter and go into large commercial.
Oh,
So there is a cutoff. I know the board does give us very specific on what how we classify everything, so.
So is there a difference in the rate per kilowatt for commercial or for residential?
Testing my memory here. I think there is, yes, right now.
Yeah, I mean, the percentage increase that they just both recently received with the recent board decision, that was the same percentage increase, but the amount
The
is.
baseline is
The
different,
baseline,
yeah.
that's what I was wondering, if the baseline
Yeah.
is different.
So which is an interesting concept, because I would think commercial, like, so if, for instance, the power shop at the corner,
Mhm.
it's a commercial establishment. I would assume all that is captured as commercial, but with this sheet, that's not the case.
Yeah, it depends on their, I guess, their load,
Okay,
yeah.
thanks.
Councillor Green.
Just a couple things on electric. I know we're getting down to brass tacks now, but just a few house cleaning things. I'm assuming on page 66 that the cost of goods sold for powers on the unaudited numbers it still needs to get updated. We must have ran a pretty substantial operating deficit this year, right? Several $100,000. So I'm assuming the 1.39 needs to be something that looks a lot more like 1.7.
Nope, that's the numbers.
1.39.
Yeah, so they were actually up to date from our last meeting. I wasn't 100% sure, but that's what we had, I think, in version 16, I think. But yeah,
1.39 million
Mhm.
is accurate.
yes,
So we ran an operating surplus last year?
Don't forget that there's 9 months a year, we were buying power from New Brunswick at $75 a megawatt hour.
Okay, well, I guess our budget, okay, well, good news.
And I think
Um,
that's really what we're coming into now with this, projected deficit for the 23-24. What we really wanted to show was back on the status of fund sheet, if we ran a deficit of that magnitude. So this is back on page number
This is our operating.
15. If we were to run a deficit of 345,000 as projected, then that would essentially drain the balance of the operating fund. And last year, if you'll recall, we presented the same thing. Like, we expected that last year's projected deficit would have drained that fund, but it didn't because we didn't run the projected deficit. So we're basically projecting on the same basis now. But our hope is through both finding out, the final information and SPI costs, everything else, and just effort to keep the costs in line, that we also won't be running a $345,000 deficit next year. But I think it's important to show that if we did, we're still able to make ends meet within our operating budget there, so.
So we think the operating fund balance on 15 is right? The
That's all right.
385,
Mm,
It started.
the starting
Oh,
balance.
yes,
Yeah, because we expected to have used most of that. in the deficit we were expecting to incur.
But wasn't the opening balance like
What page are you looking at, Julie?
page 15? Opening
Yeah,
balance is
we-
way higher than that. It was like $500,000, right? Wasn't the opening balance of the operating fund, electrical operating fund, a
Are you
lot
talking
higher?
for a different version or? for-
No, like the operating balance at the end financial statements of the opening of the year was a lot higher than, was a lot higher than 100 grand. It was hundreds of thousands. Anyway, I mean,
Yeah,
I think
you're
it's
trying to
right.
compare back the financial statements. Actually, my bill answer, I never could reconcile the budget of the financial statements. I tend to blame that on Deloitte, but that's.
One of the important features of the electrical budget is, although we've corrected for the reduction in income because we only got 20% instead of 34% from UARB, I don't think we've corrected the NSPI cost of power.
That's right, so they're still at the higher rate, so it is very probable that our deficit will shrink, based on that, yes, that's a good point to mention.
Because this draft was actually presented, it's hard to remember now, but this draft was actually presented before Nova
We
Scotia
had
Power's
the
rate decision, which did drive their prices.
Yeah.
down. But we figured that better thing was to present here that we, the worst case scenario can be accommodated, and then.
yeah,
We don't control Nova Scotia Power's cost of power, but if it's lower than predicted here, which we understand it is, that's just a lesser deficit.
And just to follow up on that, I'm not sure whether or not we've adjusted things for Q4 when all the
We
prices
have.
change again.
Yep, up to the 30.6, I believe it is, yes,
24.
Yeah.
okay.
so you'll see them on my summary page too, but that should tie up, but yes, I
The
did.
only confusion on that side is actually that I've been banging our heads against the wall this week about the board's unwillingness to tell us what's happening with the current order, because we expected to have an order by last week or at the very latest this week, and we don't. But we thought, hey, we know an order's coming. We could just ask them what happens between the decision and the order. Like, what rate is prevailing in that period? And they said, wait till you get the order to find out. And like,
Yeah.
I mean, that's a very strange answer. Surely they could.
And when we get the
Yeah.
order, and
So we're still hoping next week, but they have one last question for us that we're answering right now.
Yeah.
And so we actually don't know between the decision April 29th or April 28th and the order, hopefully next week, or as soon as possible. We actually don't know what rate prevails. Which is weird.
Between now and then.
Between the decision April
Between the
28th and the
28th
outcome
and-
order.
Exactly,
Like, we thought it would be pretty obvious, the numbers might change, but the principle of which one applies would not be subject to the order, it would just be a standard process.
Well, that's what it seems like in the.
If the order doesn't happen by date X, that means we won't have it on the June bills?
Well, we won't have it on the June bills, because it needed to come in by today or this week. So we won't have it on the June bills, but will it be retroactively reflected on the July or August, depending if you're the bi-monthly? Or will it actually be what was billed without the increases, what stands? And anything subsequent gets into that, like, push forward smoothing, we can apply next time to claw it back type of deal. Like, we don't know which one of those is gonna happen. And strangely, they couldn't tell us. I just don't understand why they can't tell us, but we'll know soon enough. And this is the worst case scenario budget. So the things we don't know, we just don't wanna project anything rosier than,
doom and gloom.
But I think page 15 showing that, like, worst case scenario, we will make it through. And I also think that on our end, we know that with the solar coming online somewhere during the year, we would have a choice in that third quarter to establish a different power purchase cost to ourselves. So,
Somewhere during the year?
well, I can't say for sure when the solar is going to come online. The projection is it'll come online in Q3.
Thank you.
But only when we fully understand the cost would we be in a position to discuss what the final power purchase cost would be.
We must have like a temporary PPA to get us through until the final.
So the
calculation.
temporary, simple enough, is use NSPI's rate, and I think that makes sense, because that's what we budgeted on.
Yeah.
But if we're looking at the year and by the fourth quarter, we know all the costs and we set a different rate, I assumed it would apply in Q1 of 24-25, but that'll be council's decision when that new rate the soonest would be Q4 of this year because we won't know the full cost until then.
So if the operating fund notionally has sufficient funds to absorb the operating deficit this year, like that must be really tight cash management. Do we still want to draw down on the loan from town general and or perpetual care, for example, to facilitate kind of smooth administration of the utility?
So
or
our recommendation now is just we wait and see.
Just wait
And
and
if
see?
Ashley sees that as advantageous, then she'll recommend it.
Okay.
But for now, we didn't think it was necessary to put in the budget because it is not presenting a negative in the fund balance, so. But yeah, it's still an option, it could be something we want to go, so.
And one last question, and then this is good news. So this is a bunch of good news around the utility. Now that. So if we move forward with the procurement of all of the transformers, will we order now and then does that automatically go to municipal finance corp to fund that? Or do we have to get separate? So do all the costs associated with that financing, is that inside this budget? Like the interest associated with that borrowing, is that?
It's
In the baseline.
not, no, so I mean,
Okay.
this is always the case with capital projects, is we never have included the financing in the budget, so. When we budgeted 400,000, that's 400,000 before financing, so if our
Okay.
decision is to finance it through MFC. It'll actually not be for 2 more years, but because that's when we'll actually pay all the costs, but at that point. We would make a decision, and if we go with MFC at whatever interest rate or however else we can pay for it, then we get the full costs in the picture.
So, sorry folks for getting too in the weeds here, but so that big procurement, because that's a big number, it's not just like, we're not writing a check, we're actually just putting in an order and we will get them in dribs and drabs as.
So yeah, so I bet it's actually coincidentally right here, because I went
Okay.
to sign up on today.
Okay,
So what that is basically it's a payment upfront, and then the rest of the payment on delivery as they come in.
Ah,
over the
interesting.
course of 2 years. Yeah.
excellent.
So what's in the budget is that upfront payment?
What's in the budget for the current year, but we did get a motion of council for the full cost, but that full cost is still excluding the financing costs, because by the time we get there, everything, the financing cost is up in the air.
Yeah.
And we don't have to finance it if somehow by then we have cash flow and money in the bank and. Yeah,
Somebody leaves us more than $100.
We have the annual conversation about the infrastructure fee. I think Councilor Wilson made the point well the other day about. We're already enjoying $300,000 of capital out of revenue, so. We're probably, in my opinion, we are probably behooves us just to keep that rate flat at the existing level. I don't know if anyone else has an opinion on that, moving that from $300, but we're already enjoying 15 cents of the tax rate is going to capital now. That's a huge, that's a major new allocation. So I wouldn't think that now's the time to talk about the infrastructure fee evolving, but anyway, I just wanted to put that on the record. I'd prefer we keep the rate where it is for now, but on the other hand, for the last 5 years I've made a motion to increase it every year. Some years it gets through, some years it doesn't. This year I think it's good where it is. I'm not sure what everybody else thinks.
Has it been 5 years since the current rate was implemented?
I don't know when it was implemented.
Oh, no, for infrastructure, the current rate.
The rate last year we increased.
We did increase it, we increased it last year, yeah.
Yeah, just modestly.
Right.
By
Yeah.
$5.
$5, yeah.
I think I can hear a chorus of taxpayers. They're applauding
Yeah.
Councilor Feeney. that-
Well, This is, I think, is that where everybody's head is though?
Yeah, but the notion, at least the way I understand it, is that we need to come to a place as a council, maybe not in this time, but at some point. Find a way that actually aligns the money we receive with how we spend it. And so if that is what is meant to be our infrastructure charge, what infrastructure is it? And is it actually a rate? So to a certain extent, for instance, maybe we can absolve Kelly from paying it because it doesn't get the services of the infrastructure by finding a way that actually matches, because I find that for certain folks, it's not equitable. They're paying for it, but they're not enjoying similar infrastructure. And maybe I'm wrong.
I think the only part of it that's really true about is wastewater.
Yeah.
And the solution, of course, would be to separate wastewater out of the infrastructure.
Councillor Wilson.
I think it's important to go back to the history of where this infrastructure charge came from, and that is a huge debate that long before I was ever on council about whether to have it as a standalone number that everybody could complain about, or to bury it in the tax rate like every other municipality in Nova Scotia does. Because nobody else has an infrastructure charge that I'm aware of. It's all just built into that.
So some
into the
people have
tax
sewer
rate.
rates.
Most people have sewer
Yeah.
rates.
Yeah, but that's not what this infrastructure charge was meant to be. It was meant to be for capital.
It
But not
was,
sewer capital?
Hmm?
Not wastewater capital though?
well, any cap, I
I
mean,
don't think so.
if I go back to the original, meeting, that was a long time ago. I was a young man standing up and talking about that, the benefits of that policy, but essentially at the time, the town had no money for any capital projects because it was entirely, all the budget was funding all operating expenses. And we had the bridge, we had all kinds of other projects on the books that we couldn't finance. The original theme was the money was going to be required and isolated and only used when we could get a third matching. Well, that was even the case up till five years ago. Now, if you look at it, I'd say 60% of this funding is actually paying our debt financing on prior period capital investments. So that's new news. So for example, last year, $70,000 of this amount went to pay for prior period capital financing. This year, it's up to 200,000. Next year, it'll be 300,000. So just because of the debt we're incurring. So the good news is it's all paid for, but to Kelly's point, it's not really. The other way to fund it would be to say we would just take that amount of money, the debt financing, and move it back to town general, and then that would be us instead of move the 200 back over instead of running the 300 out of capital out of revenue, we can move it all over, move it back.
Double the infrastructure charge today.
Oh, we can do that too, right? So anyway, I think we're in a decent place right now, but I think that's right, Kelly. I think that's.
Our day was already 10 o'clock this morning. Don't make it any worse.
Yeah. So I think we're good. I think we're good on that.
It is good to mention that we do have $200,000 of wastewater capital right now. That's almost equivalent to the entire infrastructure charge. So even if that wasn't the intention, like that's all in general, like that's not a separate utility. So it's gotta be paid for somehow. So further questions?
Anything else?
If not, we don't do a motion to recommend to ourselves. So what we would do when we're done today is just say business is concluded and the meeting's adjourned, and then actually we'll make a real nice version of this for the.
Pretty colors.
Anything else? Going once, going twice?
This is-
Agenda is concluded. The meeting is
I
adjourned.
wish you'd use your hand.
Meeting's adjourned.
Do you know how? Oh, I'll do it. So YouTube's still going. Just Kelly's not here, so I get it.
Oh, just a second, Mr.
Oh,
CAO.
questions. All right, let's see. Any questions?
The people at home, does anyone have any questions?
Don't have any questions. It looks like we've got 5 watching now for Friday afternoon. That's pretty good.
Five people
No
on
questions.
Friday afternoon.
Kelly on vacation.
Yeah, I hope not. All right, so let me cancel it.
Then the adjournment stands.
Sorry, I'm just.
Thanks, Ashley, for that. That was for another year.
Tour de force.
On email?
We did it.
Man,